Let me tell you about some of the most uncomfortable moments I have had as an online English tutor. And I want to be clear, I am not sharing this to complain or to make anyone look bad. I am sharing this because if you are thinking about becoming an online tutor, or if you are already one and you have had similar experiences, I want you to know that you are not alone. These things happen. And sometimes the only way to process them is to talk about them honestly. So let me start with a story that actually has a surprisingly good ending, even though it did not start that way. I had a student once, an older gentleman, who had worked as an engineer for most of his life. He was clearly intelligent, very experienced, and he had a lot of interesting things to say about his career. But early in one of our classes, he said something that caught me completely off guard. We were talking about bathing culture, which sounds like an odd topic for an English class, but it came up naturally in conversation. In many parts of Japan, public baths are a normal and beloved part of daily life. People go regularly, they relax, they socialize. It is genuinely a cultural tradition with a long history. And this student mentioned that he enjoyed visiting public baths. I was listening, genuinely interested, and then he said something about skin color. He commented that he would feel uncomfortable bathing in a public space because his skin tone was different from most people around him. And the way he said it, the framing, the tone, it landed in a way that felt uncomfortable for me as a Filipina with a darker complexion. I will not go into every detail, but it was one of those moments where you are sitting there in a professional setting, keeping your face neutral, while something inside you is quietly reacting. Now here is where the story gets interesting. That same student came back and booked my class again sometime later. And in the time between his first class and his return, I had watched an animated film about a Japanese aircraft designer from the World War II era. I had become genuinely fascinated by the story, and I found myself reading more about Japanese aircraft engineering from that period. So when this student came back, instead of bracing myself for another uncomfortable conversation, I steered things toward airplanes. I asked about his engineering background. I shared what I had learned from the film. I showed genuine curiosity about his area of expertise. And something shifted. He lit up completely. He became warm and enthusiastic and engaged in a way that was totally different from our first class. By the end of the session, he was happy. The conversation had been genuinely interesting for both of us, and the awkwardness of before had faded into the background. I remember thinking afterward, sometimes the most useful thing you can do with a difficult student is find the one topic that makes them forget to be difficult. It does not always work, but when it does, it is kind of remarkable. The second story is one that still sits with me, honestly. I had a female student who had been studying English for a long time and who had actually visited the Philippines at some point in her life. During our class, she brought up the topic of wages and income, and then, in what I think she genuinely believed was just an observation, she commented on how low my pay was as a tutor. She said it directly, without much filter, almost like she was reporting a fact. She had some awareness of the rates tutors earn, possibly from her time in the Philippines or from general knowledge, and she found it notable enough to bring up in the middle of a conversation class. I kept my composure. I stayed professional, but I want to be honest about how that feels from the inside. When a student, someone you are there to help, turns the conversation into a commentary on how little you are earning, it creates a very specific kind of discomfort. It is not anger exactly. It is more like a quiet deflation. You are there doing your job, trying to create a good experience for this person, and suddenly the dynamic shifts into something that feels more like pity than respect. After the class, she gave me 4 stars. And I noticed because I pay attention to these things. Not because I am obsessive about ratings, but because when someone who is just discussing your salary gives you less than a perfect score, it adds a layer to the interaction that is hard to ignore. I moved on, but I did not forget. The third story is the one I want to handle most carefully because it touches on something that I find genuinely offensive, but I also want to discuss it in a way that is fair and informative rather than just emotional. I had a female student once who made some generalizing comments about Filipino women in the context of relationships with foreign men, particularly Japanese men. The framing of what she said suggested a view of Filipino women that reduced them to a stereotype, one connected to desperation, financial need, and availability. I am aware that these stereotypes exist. I know the history behind them. I know that economic inequality between countries creates situations that some people exploit and others misunderstand. I am also aware that industries and social dynamics exist in various countries, including Japan, where younger people sometimes enter into transactional relationships with older, wealthier individuals, and that these situations are complex, documented, and widely discussed. There is no shortage of information about this if you want to research it yourself. But here's my point. When a student sits across from you in what is supposed to be a professional educational setting and casually generalizes about women from your country in a way that implies something demeaning, that crosses a line. It does not matter how worldly or well-traveled or educated that person is. It does not matter if they think they are just being candid or realistic. It is disrespectful. And for me personally, as someone who is single by choice, who has no interest in being in a relationship for financial reasons or any of the reasons that stereotype suggests, hearing that kind of comment directed at my nationality feels like being reduced to something I am not and have never been. I handled it professionally in the moment. I did not argue or lecture. But I am telling you now, clearly and directly, that these are the kinds of encounters that remind you why emotional boundaries in this job are not optional. They are necessary. So, what do you do with experiences like these? I have thought about this a lot. You cannot control what a student says. You cannot screen for every possible uncomfortable topic before a class begins. What you can control is how you respond in the moment, how quickly you recover afterward, and whether you allow these encounters to define how you feel about the work overall. For me, the answer has been to hold on to the positive interactions, the ones where a conversation genuinely clicked, where I learned something, where the student left clearly better than they came in. Those moments are real too, and they happen more often than the difficult ones. But I also think it is important to talk about the difficult ones, because pretending they do not happen does not help anyone. If you are a tutor, current, or aspiring, I want you to go into this work with your eyes open. You will meet students who say things that surprise you, confuse you, or honestly offend you. You will have to make real-time decisions about how to redirect a conversation, whether to continue a class, and how to protect your own sense of dignity, while still doing your job well. That is a skill that nobody really teaches you formally. You develop it through experience, through making mistakes, through reflecting on what happened, and deciding what you would do differently next time. And if you are a student taking online language classes, I want to gently offer this perspective. Your tutor is a professional doing a real job, with real feelings and real cultural identity. They are not a blank screen for you to project assumptions onto. They're a person. Treat them like one. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, subscribe to help me hit my 2,000 video goal. This is my unfiltered diary of solo living in the Philippines, from the tough days in the ESL classroom to my journey learning Japanese and Korean. Yes, I'm still a beginner. If you'd like to support my work and my retirement fund, check out the Buy a Treat for My Pets link in the description. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update. Thanks for being part of the journey.
See you then.